Session. All right, Jabot, say good morning, a Gittin Chodesh. Begin by thanking our sponsors for this morning's learning. To thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Menachim Av, Benjamin and Elise Wall from Eretz Yisrael. Baruch Hashem, a second month in a row that we are zochet to have Talmud Torah sponsors from Eretz Yisrael. And again, the wording of the dedication, which I'll read today, is very beautiful. From all of us that do not have the privilege to attend personally in the Beis Medrash, but are truly blessed by the self-sacrifice of Moshe Abramson and Jeremy Lassen, who enable us to be enveloped in the Gemara that we are zochet to learn every single day. May Hashem, in His wisdom, reward those volunteers in measure for the Torah they allow us to obtain. So truly beautiful. Our week of learning sponsors today, Aaron and Alana Weinberg, with gratitude to Hashem on the 12th anniversary of the refuah of their son, Yonatan Shai, and Saeed and Sima Hakin, also weekly learning sponsor in the schos of a refuah shalema for Avram ben Zinat and for Hatzlacha for the entire mishpacha. We thank all of our sponsors for their incredible generosity, and Rabbi, with that, let us begin. We have a lot to do today, Meretz Hashem. Not a lot of time, but still a lot to do. Today's daf is Samech Talad 64. We are picking up in Meretz Hashem on Samech Gimel of days 63b, and we left off actually at the first of the widest lines. So if you remember again, we left off in the middle of a question. The Gemara was dealing with the following case, where a man sent a get to his wife. Reuben sent a get to Rachel. The shliach goes ahead and finds the wife kneading dough. She says, I have your get. She says, no problem, I can't accept it now. Do me a favor, you accept it for me. So then the Shaibo says what? So Halach Lamai said, does that work? In other words, we were spending the entire day yesterday focusing on the husband's ability to reframe the wife's shliach. So now the Shaila is in the reverse. Does the wife have the ability to go ahead and transform the husband's? I realized yesterday I was using the wrong term. When the husband sends the shaliach to deliver a get, that's the shliach la'olacha. When the wife sends the shaliach to retrieve the get, it's the shliach lahava'ah, right? So again, I was calling them both shliach la'olacha. Again, it's semantics, but it's an important distinction in any event. So can the wife now transform the husband's shliach la'olacha into her shliach lahava'ah? That's the simple question. So the question that Gemara was dealing with over here is, the fundamental problem seems to be, is one of the tenets in shlichus is that a shaliach has to have the ability to report back to the principal, to the maker, so to speak, that I fulfilled my mission. Well, in this case over here, the shaliach can't report back to the Baal. Why can't he report back to the Baal? Why not? Because he doesn't exist anymore. So the Gemara points out over here, they sent this shaila to Rabbi Ami. So the Gemara shachlu v'chazor shlichus eitz habal. So I'll say so first wide line. Rabbi Chia bar Abba Amar nesashi b'davar. They send the shayla to Rabbi Chia bar Abba. Rabbi Chia bar Abba said, let me think about it a little bit. Try to get back to you. Hadr shalchuha kamei Rabbi Chia bar Abba. They sent the shayla a second time to Rabbi Chia bar Abba. Amar. Kalhani shalchu va'azli. So Rabbi Chia bar Abba said, why are you constantly sending? Why are you asking me again? Ki'echi dimesapkaluhu lidido. How can I misapkan lididon? So Rabbi Chia bar Abba said, listen, the same way you guys don't know, I don't know either. It's like, I'm just not sure. They will say, you ever have a situation like this where somebody asks you a question and you say you don't know, they ask you again, say, I still don't know. So I was saying, I still don't know. Again, I need time to think about it. I don't know what to do. So finally he said, Havi davar sheba erva, the davar sheba erva choletzes. So Abba would say, in this kind of case, you'd have to say it's a suffix. We're not sure what to do in this kind of case. And I will say, what does it mean if it was a suffix case, we'd be choletzes? So I will say what that would mean is, halacha l'maisa, if you would have a situation like this, where let's say again, wife would say to the shaliach, accept the get on my behalf. And then let's say before the get ever reached her hand, ultimately the husband died, she'd be suffix migureshes. Right? So now what would mean suffix migureshes? So suffix migureshes would mean that if technically her husband died without children, we would make her do chalitza, would not allow her to do yibum. Okay, so the Gemara goes on, Hava Uvda. So actually a situation like this once occurred, this exact type of case. Rashi says, Ki ai gavna, v'atzucha Rabbi Yitzchak bar Shmuel bar Marta, get v'chalitza. Rabbi Yitzchak bar Shmuel bar Marta required a get and chalitza. The Gemara says, Tarti? You need to get and chalitza. It doesn't make any sense. No. Get mechayim v'chalitza la'achar misa. That in a situation like this, ultimately, again, Rabbi Yitzchak bar Shmuel would have said, husband, you have to give her another get. If the husband's alive, we make her give another get. And in the event that the husband died before the get ever reached her hand, then Allah would require chalitza in that type of situation. Good. But we'll say another very interesting case. These are some fascinating cases here. Hahu davakar luhu nafasa. There was a woman whose name was Nafasa. That was her name. And what happened? Azul Sahadi. So Nafasa's husband, we'll call him still Ruvain, right? So Ruvain is divorcing his wife Nafasa. Azul Sahadi, so he commissioned witnesses to go ahead and write a get. Azul Sahadi Kasov Tafasa. The witnesses wrote the wrong name in the get. They wrote the wrong name. So we'll say, so what's the shaila? What's the shaila? So Amar Yitzchak bar Shmuel bar Marta Mishmei Dirav Asu Eidim Shlichusan. The Eidim did their shlichus. That will say, now what does this mean? So look at Rashi for just a moment. Azul Sahadi Sha'amar Lahem Baal Kisvu Tnuget the Kasuf Tafasa Tov Bishma Asu Eidim Shlichusam Leget Achar Leget Echad Asum Luchim the Eidim. So we'll say, here's the interesting side that we're going to deal with over here. Ruvain tells Eidim to write a get for his wife. Her name is Nafasa. They write a get. They write Tafasa. They make a mistake. Rabbi Yitzchak bar Shmuel said, that's it. They can't write another get. Why can't they write another get? See, he says they were commissioned to write a get. They messed up. Okay, that's it. It's outside of the scope of their agency to write a second get when they were only commissioned to write one get. Fascinating idea. So the Gemara says, Maskef l'Rava, Mika Amrlu Kisovu Chaspa V'Havula. I don't understand. Did he commission them to write a piece of clay and to give it to her? In other words, what did Ruvain commission the witnesses to do? To write a valid get. Ela Amarabba, Vadai Ikasov Sahadi Gita Ma'alya, Va'avid, Asu Eidim Shlichusam. So Rabbi would say, look, I agree with you in the following case. If the Eidim wrote a proper get, both said the Eidim actually wrote a proper get, and then what happens? And then Lamaisa, the get itself was lost before it was ever delivered to the wife. So Rabbi says, in that case, I agree that the witnesses would not be empowered to write a second get. Why not? Because they executed their agency, right? What was their agency? To write a get. Did they write a get? Absolutely. So that's the end of the discussion. So we'll say, what? Even in that case, Rav Nachman says, I disagree. Did the husband say to the witnesses, do me a favor, write a get, put it in your pocket, right? Don't do anything, just write it. Of course not. We'll say, what's the entire point of writing the get? What's the point of writing the get? The delivery of the get to actually affect divorce. So we'll say, this is a very interesting case. So essentially what you have over here is as follows. If witnesses go ahead and write a get, so there's two stages in this conversation. In stage one, witnesses are writing the get, right? And there's a mistake in the get. So we'll say the Gemara seems to come to the conclusion that obviously they are empowered to go ahead and rewrite the get. In other words, they do not need a second commissioning of their agency to rewrite the correct get. Why? Because you understand the parameters of their agency. What are the parameters of their agency? What are the parameters? Write a get. Write a proper get. As many times as it takes you to write a proper get. That's stage one of the Gemara. Stage two of the Gemara then is something very interesting, which is, let's say, now what happens after they write it, but it gets lost before it gets delivered? So I might have thought they wrote a proper get. They're not empowered to now write a second one. Kamash Mula, no. We'll say, what are they empowered to do? They are empowered ultimately again to write a get and get it to the woman. So as many times as it takes to write it and get it to the woman. So even let's say, so in case two is they wrote a proper get, then after they wrote the get was lost. They are empowered to go ahead and write it again in order to ultimately go ahead and get it to the woman. Incredible. Now I will say, now interestingly enough, the Gemara is a follow-up. By the name Rava, Rav Nachman, Kisvu utenu l'shliach mahu. They will say, what about the following case? Listen to how fascinating this is. Ruvain says to witnesses, listen to this, guys, write two witnesses, write a get, and give it to the shaliach to deliver it to the wife. Deliver it to the wife. Okay, so now both say, sorry. So two people involved over here. Right, Ruvain, husband, says to the witnesses, write the get and give it to shaliach, he's going to deliver it. So mahu. So both say, so now the shaila is, what are the parameters ultimately again of their shlichus? So the Gemara will say, now what is this? Now what does this mean? So the Gemara says, look at Rashi, first white line in Rashi, kisvu tenu l'shliach shalish sheminisi v'chein asu va'avad b'derech. Mi'arminan asu kol shlichusam v'nestalku. So we'll say, now listen to this. So we'll say, here's the shaila. So the witnesses write the get, they deliver it to the shliach loses it. So now what's the shaila? Are they empowered to write the get again? So what does it depend on? Mao. Siluki salakluhu. On one end you can say, listen, the parameters of what were the parameters of their shlichos? What were the parameters? Write it, give it to the shliach. Once you do that, you're done. Which means that if the shliach loses it, you are not empowered to rewrite another get. O Dilma, letircha dido chayish. Or maybe I will say no. Maybe really what the husband actually wanted was what? He wanted the shluchim to write the get and to deliver the get, but he thought maybe it was a bit too onerous of a task. He did not want them to be saddled with that additional responsibility. So what did he do? He hired a courier, but he didn't actually mean to remove the edim from the process until the point that the get itself is delivered to the wife. That's what it means. Adilma letircha dido chayish. He's makbid. He doesn't want to create the tircha, a difficulty for them. So I'll say, isn't this fascinating? So again, husband is saying to the edim, write the get, deliver to the shaliach. They write the get, they deliver to the shaliach, and now what happens? Shaliach loses it. So we'll say, so now here's the shaila. Are edim empowered to write a second get or not? So again, it all depends on how you define the parameters of the shlichos. Are the parameters of shlichos? Just get to the shliach. Once you do that, you guys are done. So therefore, once you've done your job, you're out. And if shliach loses it, that will require a new commissioning of shlichos by the husband. Or maybe not. What the husband really wants is for the edim to do this process from beginning to end. But he doesn't want to saddle them with too much of a tirchadik responsibility. So he says, just get it to the shliach. But really, again, their job is to get the job finished, right? The shlichus to get the job finished, and therefore if the shliach loses it, they have the ability to write the get again. Incredible. So the Gemara says, Ravashi v'yolichla mahu. And what happens if halacha l'maisa? What happens if halacha l'maisa he tells them v'yolichla? So I'll say, look at Rashi. Ravashi v'yolichla mahu imtim salar bahach delo amar ela kisvu utenu l'shliach. So I'll say, in this case, in case number one, so Lemaisa, what the husband said to the shluchim was, write the get, and then deliver to the shliach. What happens if the husband said, write the get, deliver to the shliach, so it could then be taken to the wife? In other words, he includes the yolichla, he includes that last part in the wording of the shlichus. So does that change anything? To which the Gemara says, teku. So I will say the Gemara leaves this as an open-ended question. Again, there's a little bit of ambiguity in the scope of the shlichus. Incredible. Let's go back to Rabbi Shmuel says, good. All right. So Rabbi Shmuel says, we'll say this. Well, the truth is, there's interesting Rambams to do in this, but I think what we're going to do is just for the sake of time in Miras Hashem this morning, we're going to go back to what I will tell you is that leaving aside this second case, which is subject to a bit more dispute, in the first case I will say, where halacha l'maisa, a husband says to the edim, write a get for my wife, right? Where let's say there's no shaliach, he just says write a get for my wife, and they make a mistake in the get, or even after ultimately again the get is fully written, the get is lost, the edim are empowered to write the get. The Rambam says afilu mea pamim, even 100 times. Even 100 times. In other words, because it's understood that the parameters of the shlichos are not just the ability to generate a get one time, and if you get it right the first time, great, and if not, the shlichos is terminated. But obviously, again, the goal of the shlichos is to generate an effective get, which will result in divorce. So as many times as it takes you to get that right and ultimately get it into the hands of the woman, the Eidim are empowered to do so. Incredible. Let's finish up from Shimon Omer. Afal meres toli Giti in Ratzah lachzor lo yachzor. So Rav Shimon said that if the wife goes ahead, so we'll say, so everyone agrees, remember, if the wife commissions a shliach lekabbalah, Shliach lekabbalah, once the husband places the get in the hands of the Shliach lekabbalah, she is divorced and he is unable to retract. Rabbi Shmuel Silber said there are other types of words. So, in other words, the classic lashon for creation of Shliach lekabbalah is what? Hiskabel ligiti, receive my get on my behalf. Rabbi Shmuel Silber just points out that there are other Lashonos, other expressions that also create a shliach lekabbalah scenario. So afa omeres tol ligiti, take my get from me. In ratzah lachzor lo yachzor. Tan rabbanon tol li, if the woman says take from me, sa li, carry for me, v'yehei li, it shall be for me, biyadecha, in your hand, kulan lashon kabbalah. So good. So all Rabbi Shmuel does is he expands. It's not just his skabel ligiti that creates a shliach lekabbalah, but there are other expressions that also create shliach lekabbalah as well. Incredible. But we'll say let's go weiter. Mishnah, really interesting Mishnah. Ha'isha she'amre skabel ligiti. We'll say when a woman creates a shliach lekabbalah. So remember again, we'll say shliach lekabbalah is an extension of the woman herself. So literally, when the husband places the get in the hands of the shliach lekabbalah, the woman is divorced. So Aisha she'amre hiskabel ligiti, the woman says, receive my get on my behalf. So tzricha shtei kitei edim. You need two sets of witnesses. Fascinating. Why? Shtayim she'omrim b'fanenu amra, two witnesses who witness the actual commission of the shliach lekabbalah. So she has to appoint the shliach lekabbalah in the presence of two people. Ushnaim she'omrim b'fanenu kibel v'kara. And two witnesses who say that the Shliach lekabbalah received the get and tore the get in our presence. We'll see what that tearing is in just a little bit. So Rabbi says, the Gemara says, that you can use the same set of witnesses for both testimonies. In other words, you can use the same two witnesses to witness the commission of the Shliach lekabbalah and the actual reception of the get and the tearing of the get by the shliach lekabbalah. So afilu hein rishonim ve'afilu hein achronim, top of samach talit, o echam min rishonim ve'echam min achronim ve'echam min sarif man. Or I will say you could use, in other words, you could use any variation. You could use the same two witnesses for both testimonies, or you could use again one from the first set, one from the second set, incorporate the third. You could use any variation. We'll say, so again, fascinating halacha. We thought up until this point in time the shliach lekabbalah is just an easy 1, 2, 3. Because remember again, like any type of shliach, in general, you don't need eidos. You don't need eidos to go ahead and be memanen to appoint the shaliach. Here the Mishnah introduces us that for shliach lekabbalah, two sets of witnesses, one to witness the actual appointment of the shaliach, and the second set of witnesses to actually witness the reception of the get by the shliach lekabbalah himself. Incredible. Let's analyze. Says the Gemara, top of Samachtal 64a, second line down from the top. Itmar bal omer lepikadon ushlish omer legerushin mi ne'eman. Fascinating case here. So we'll say here's the situation. Ruvain is divorcing his wife. Well, I should say Ruvain has a wife, Rachel. Now what happens? Ruvain writes a get, and he gives it to a shaliach. Gives it to the shaliach. Now we'll say, so now what happens? So shliach claims that ultimately, again, so let's say the husband claims that he gave it to the shliach lepikada. Pikada means what? To hold on to it. To hold on to it, right? He didn't have intention to divorce. Things are not great. He likes to be on top of the situation, right? So he decides, you know what, let's have the get ready to go. But I didn't mean to divorce her. I just gave it to the shaliach to hold on to. Shaliach says, no, he gave it to me to effect divorce. Take a look at Rashi. Bal omer lepikadon, get shenosam biat shlish, bal omer, shlish literally means third party. Third party. We'll use the lashon, right? So the get that I gave into the hands of the third party, bal omer lepikadon nasati biyadecha, ushlish omer legerushin nasatali shayisi shlucha lekabala v'niskarsha bekabalasi va'ish va'isha yachabir. So, both listen to this. So, here, fascinating. So, Reuven, the husband, gives over a get to a third party. So, husband says, "I only gave it to you to hold on to." Right? I didn't mean to affect divorce. And the third party says, "What are you talking about? I am Rachel's shliach lekabala." And by definition, when you gave it to me to act as the extension of her. And Lamaisa, she's divorced. So mina eman. I will say who's believed. Great case, right? Who is believed? Rav Huna Amar, Baal Ne'eman. Rav Huna said the husband is believed. Rav Chisda Amar, Shlish Ne'eman. Rav Chisda says, no, the Shaliach is believed. So the Gemara, let's analyze this. Rav Huna Amar Baal Ne'eman. So Rav Huna says the husband is believed. Di'im Isa delegerushin Yaveh Nehilei, L'didei Havi Yaveh Nehilei. Rav will say, why is the husband believed? Because Lamaisa, if he wanted to divorce his wife, what would he have done? What would he have done? Given her the get. Rav will say, that's why Rashi says over here, in the last phrase in Rashi, Va'ish va'isha yachad be'ir. We're talking about a case where husband and wife are in the same city. Because we'll say it would be different, like they're not in the same city, you could believe the claim of a Shech Kabbalah a little bit more, but they're in the same city. So Rav Huna says the husband is believed because Lamai says since they're in close proximity to each other, if husband wanted to divorce his wife, he could just easily give her a get. There's no need to use a shaliach over here. Rav Chisda Amar Shlish Ne'eman. Rav Chisda says that the shliach is believed. Why? So the Gemara says, Rav Chisda Amar Shlish Ne'eman, Daha Hemnei. Because the husband believed him. Now, what does this mean? When you give something over, Rav Chisda essentially saying is like this: when you give something over into the jurisdiction of a third party, understand what you are doing is vesting them with the credibility to ultimately tell everyone what the circumstances are of this item. In other words, I will say, in general, when does a person have we see this in halacha all the time, right? When does a person have the heightened level of credibility? When they're in possession of something, right? This is why we say the classic idea of hamotzi mechavera alav haraya. If you come over to me and you tell me that I owe you $1,000, that's fine. You can make the claim, but who is the burden of proof upon? Who's the burden of proof upon? Right? The extractor. Right? Why? Because when I have something in my possession is not just 9/10 of us, 9.5, right? 9.5 tenths out of 10. It's heightened level of probability that whoever has the item is the owner. So too over here, when Reuven deposited a get with the shaliach, with the shlish, with the third party, so we'll say what he's doing is just he's giving him the get and he's vesting him with the credibility to ultimately create the narrative around that get as well. Incredible. Because if he didn't believe him, we'll say if Reuven didn't believe shlish, then what? He wouldn't give it to him. He wouldn't give it to him. So fundamental machlok is incredible. Massive Rabbi Abba says, Hodas baldin k'mei edim, and generally going to both say the halacha is that when you admit something, admission is as powerful as 100 witnesses. Ushlish ne'aman mishnehem. And yet a third party is more believed than both of these individuals. What are we talking about? Ketzad, listen to this. Ze omer kach. Ze omer kach. V'ze omer kach. Right? This one, Reuven says like this. And Shimon says like this. Shlish ne'aman. Ultimately, again, the third party is believed. So I will say, so what this ultimately means over here is, if you can imagine, if let's say, again, third party has $1,000 in his possession, and Reuven says $1,000 is mine, and Shimon says $1,000 is mine, and they have a machlokas about the details of the transaction, and the third party who is in possession ultimately, again, says a different narrative, the third party is believed. Shlish ne'eman. Shlish ne'eman. So the Gemara says, so we'll say, what do you see from here? This is a pretty strong raya, ultimately again to support Rav Chisda, that the third party is the believed party, even over the Baal. Shiny mammon, the Yisyav mechila. Money's different. We'll say, that's a monetary matter. Money's different, because money could be forgiven. What does that mean? Take a look at Rashi. If you forgive a monetary claim, it is forgiven. Therefore, again, the third party is believed. Since ultimately, again, both parties agreed and gave over the money to the third party, Ulahamin komashi yomar, aval b'milsa di isura in biyad ulahamin. But say it could be that monetary matters are different, because when you give over money into the hands of a third party, it is clear that what is happening, you are trusting that third party to determine the parameters of the transactional reality. However, the Gemara says when it comes to Isser, Isser may not be the same. Perhaps again, Isser is not determined by the words of the third party. So the Gemara says, V'hatanya, but we learned V'chein leGittin. But we learned the same halacha applies to Gittin, that the third party is believed by Gittin. So I will say again, this seems to be a pretty strong raya, ultimately to support Rav Chisda. Gitte Mammon. When it says Gittin, it doesn't mean Gittin like divorce documents. Rather, what does it mean? Monetary documents. But another price it says also for documents. So documents means financial documents. So Gittin must mean Gittin. Midi Gabi Hadadi Tanya. But do you think all of these statements were taught at the same time? They weren't all taught together. So therefore, again, it's possible again that one teaching said Gittin, but Gittin meant monetary documents. Then you had another teaching that taught shtaras that also meant monetary documents. They just weren't taught at the same time. So different expressions used for the same thing taught at different times. I will say, but it doesn't have to be right that it applies to Gittin. Okay, so we're still left with our fundamental machlokes. Husband gave over a get into the possession of the shlish. Husband then says, I only gave it to you for safekeeping. Shlish says, what are you talking about? I am the shliach lekabbalah for your now ex-wife. Who is believed? Rav Huna says, husband is believed. Rav Chisda says, shlish is believed. Let's go weiter. Tnan. Ha'isha shamris kabel legiti. So now the Gemara quotes our Mishnah, right? A woman says, a woman wants to appoint a shliach lekabbalah. Shliach lekabbalah. So what happens? Tzricha shtei kitei edim. She needs two sets of witnesses. Shnaim shimur b'fanenu amra. Two witnesses to say that she commissioned the shliach lekabbalah in our presence. Ushnaim sheyomru b'fanenu kibel v'kara. And two witnesses that say we saw the shliach lekabbalah receive the get and tear it. But why? I will say, why do we need witnesses? Va'amai lehemni l'shlish. I will say, if we're saying, if Rav Chisda is right, that a third party is believed, then I will say, the shliach l'kabbalah should have credibility even without witnesses, right? Think about this. What are we saying over here? That if a third party has credibility, then Lamaisa, again, he should have credibility independent of testimonial corroboration, right? He shouldn't need witnesses to testify that he received the get and tore it up. To which the Gemara says, you're right. This is actually very interesting. That halacha l'maisa, when does a third party have credibility? When does a third party have credibility? When they are in possession of the object in dispute. In the case of the Mishnah Abosai, does the shliach lekabbalah have the get anymore? And the answer is no. Remember again, what happened to the get? What happened to the get? He tore it up. He tore it. So I will say, so ultimately, so look at Rashi for just a moment. He doesn't have the get anymore in his possession. Now, it could be that he has the torn pieces of the get in his hands. So the Gemara says, Bifanenu ein shlish ele imkina shlishus biado. Demigo di by havi avid bay my dika'amar ne'eman nami al amiraso. Well, so listen to this. So the Gemara says, you're right. Had we not been talking about a case where the get's been torn up, at least according to Rav Chisda, the third party would have credibility even without testimonial corroboration. So the Gemara says, Teinach Amra. Kibel Lamali. So I will say, I understand why you need testimony to say that she appointed the Shliach LeKabbalah. Fine, I could accept that. But Kibel Lamali, ultimately, again, why do I need witnesses to say that the Shliach LeKabbalah received the get? So Amar Rav, Hamani, Rabbi Lazar Who is it? Rabbi Lazar. We'll say back to the beginning of the Masechta. The Amar Eide Misira Karsi. Rabbi Lazar is the one who says Eide Misira Karsi, that it's the witnesses who give over the get, ultimately again, who are the ones who affect the actual divorce. And therefore, again, you need testimony that the husband actually delivered the get to the Shliach LeKabbalah. Fine. So we'll say, the Gemara says, Kara Lamali, but so we'll say, let's just pause here for just a moment. So we'll say, interestingly enough, it sounds like over here so far that the Gemara actually is coming out in accordance with the position of Rav Chisda, namely that halacha l'maisa, the shlish, the third party is believed. But when is the third party believed? So when is the third party believed? when he has the object in his hand, what's the logic behind that? The logic behind that is if you trust a person enough to give something over into their possession, implicit in that trust, right? Implicit in that trust is the trust for them to define the parameters of the actual transactional narrative. That's what's unfolding over here. So if you trust the person enough to give over, whether it's money or whether it's a get in their hand, then you trust them to go ahead and actually espouse the correct transactional narrative. But again, that's only when the object is actually in their hand. That's why in the case of the Mishnah Rabbi say, the shliach is tearing up the get. Well, once he's tearing up the get, then ultimately again, the item is no longer in his hand. If the item is no longer in his hand, then he doesn't have credibility without edus. Incredible. So Amar Rabba, sorry. Kara Lamali, so let's get back for a second. Why are we tearing up the get? Why are we tearing up the get? So Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Rav B'shas HaGzeira Shanu. We will say this was a time, ultimately again, a time of Gezerah, a time of decrees. I will say, now what does this mean? Take a look at Rashi. Kara Lamali, Shas Gzeras HaMalchus Hava, Shegazru Al HaMitzvos. Ultimately, I will say this was a time where ultimately, again, there were Gzeras about mitzvahs. Now, if you look at Agos V'tziyunim, he writes over at Tzarech Lomar, Hashmad, the Fusi censor. You can see over here, I will say that it was changed from Gzeira, it was changed from Shmad to Gzeira. I will say it's talking about one of the times throughout our history where Jewish practices and laws were outlawed. Right? That halacha, the observance of halacha was outlawed. And therefore, again, the giving of a get would have been forbidden, possibly even under the penalty of death. So what would they do? I will say it's incredible. What would they do? They would go ahead and give a get, and right after it was received, tear it up. That way, again, there was no physical record of it. And I have to understand also, once we get, first of all, say also it's incredible to learn a Gemara like this on Rosh Chodesh Av. Right? Rosh Chodesh Av, the beginning of the 9 days, where we mourn everything that we have lost over the last thousands of years. And I will say, the Gemara kind of leads us, which time of destruction. I will say, do you know how many times throughout our history you could plug in this Gemara? Right? How many times throughout our history? So, b'chol davadar, sheb'chol davadar omdim aleinu lechalosenu. In every generation, someone arises to obliterate us. In every single generation. V'hakadosh baruch hu matzilenu miyadam. Okay, wrong Yom Tov, that's from Pesach. Right? But lamaisa, but the narrative still is so true. So I'll say, imagine living in a time, chas v'shalom rachman lo aleinu, where ultimately you can't even give a get, you can't perform mitzvahs, and if you do so, you have to do so in secret, and if you do so, you have to obliterate any trail that the mitzvah has been performed. This has been the story of our people throughout the generations, and it's this heartbreak, and it's this persecution that literally we remember in these incredible and difficult days ahead. So we'll say, so that's the kara. That's the kara. That's why they're tearing it up. Amar Rabba, umod Rav Huna, di amra ihi lididi. So what says this? So Rabba says, umod Rav Huna, di amra ihi lididi amrali shlish delegerishin yavi nehele mehemna. So we'll say, so now listen to this. This is fascinating. Okay, so we'll say, so here's what we have, right? So now, right? Husband gave the get into the hands of a shlish, to a third party. So what's happening? So Rav Huna goes ahead and said, now husband says there was a pikadon. Shliach says, I'm a shliach lekabbalah. Rav Huna says, husband's believed. Rav Chisda says, shlish is believed. It appears, just based on reading the Gemara, it appears that we're going to side really much more with Rav Chisda. Fine. Now the Gemara says, by the way, even Rav Huna agrees in the following case. Listen to this. What happens if she says, the amra ihi, now we'll say, imagine, up until now, it's only been a machlokes between the husband and the shaliach and the shlish. Now imagine the wife is present and she says, liditi amra li shlish, by the way, the third party told me, that when my husband gave him the get, my husband gave the shlish a get for the sake of divorce. So now the wife is weighing in. So the Gemara says, Rabbah says, even Rav Huna agrees that Allah Chalamais, in this case, she would be divorced. The Gemara says, what? Mi'ika midi dishlish kufei lo mehemen. So I don't understand. According to Rav Huna, will say, the shlish himself is not believed, and now vi'ihi mehemna, and now because the wife weighs in on this, suddenly we're going to believe the testimony of the shlish, or that doesn't make sense. Ela'i amra, Rather, I will say, if she says, Kamai didi ligerishin yavi nehile mehemna. Rather, I will say, no. Even Rav Huna would agree, if the wife says, my husband gave the get to the shlish in my presence for the sake of divorce, she is believed. Even Rav Huna would agree. Why? Migo di baya amra lididi yahaves nehile bal. Was it because she could have just as easily said what? She could have said, my husband gave me the get. Right? She could have made a claim like that. Right? She could have made that claim. So that's amigo. So because she could have made that claim, but instead she makes the claim that my husband gave the get to the shali, to the shlish, right? To act as my shliach like Kabbalah. Ultimately, again, she is believed. I will say, but again, that's amigo. That's amigo case. Okay. Baal Amr Legerishin. So we'll say, now watch this. So we'll say, so therefore, Machlokes number one, Machlokes Rav Huna and Rav Chisda about get given from husband to the shlish. Husband says pikadon, I just gave it to the shlish for safekeeping. So shliach says mishliach like Kabbalah. Rav Huna says the husband is believed. Rav Chisda says the shlish is believed. It appears that everyone agrees in a situation where the woman says, I was present, and my husband gave it to the shlish for the sake of divorce. That ultimately, again, she is believed based on the migo. Fine. Next case. Bal Amr Legerishin, Ushlish Amr Legerishin. So we'll say, okay, another interesting case. Husband gives the get to the shlish. Husband says, I gave it for divorce. Shlish says, he gave it for divorce. V'omeres nasan li va'avad. And she says, I received the get, but ultimately, again, it's lost. It's lost, right? So ultimately, as well, say, so now what's the halacha? Amar Rabbi Yonasan, have a davar sheba erva, they davar sheba erva pachos mishnayim. Ultimately, again, I will say, so here's the problem. The problem is now that there's no document. There's no document. So what I have over here is husband saying I divorced her, shlish saying yes, he divorced her, wife saying I got the get, not suddenly, but I don't have the document anymore. So what do we do? Rabbi Yochanan says davar sheba erva. I will say this is a matter concerning immorality, or really a matter of morality, right? A matter of erva. Ultimately, again, and I will say for davar sheba erva, you need two witnesses. You need two witnesses, and ultimately, again, you don't have that in this particular case. Va'amai v'shlish. We'll say, I don't understand. Why don't we just believe the third party? Right? What did we establish? That Allah Chalamais, a third party could be believed. So why not just believe the third party? To once again, we'll say, what do we say? We'll say, remember again, let's go back for just a second. Even according to Rav Chisda, who says that you believe the shlish, I will say, when do you believe a third party? When they have the object. In this case, we'll remember again, there is no get. There is no document. So if there is no document, there is no credibility to the third party's claim either. Why don't we believe the husband? Right? The husband saying he divorced her. If a husband says, I divorced my wife, he is believed. Mika Amar. So the Gemara says, ultimately, again, I will say, does the husband say, I divorced her? But remember again, what is the husband saying in this case? Rashi clarifies this. Rashi says, what is he saying? He's saying, I gave it to the shlish. And my intention was that the shlish would be the shliach laholacha. So I can't say I divorced her. I can say that I gave it to the shliach. And I will say, so what's happening over here is the shliach is saying, right, husband saying I gave it to the shliach. Shliach is saying give it to the woman saying I received it, but there's no document. But I lost it. There's no document. So again, husband can't claim I divorced her because the husband gave the get to the shliach. So again, he doesn't necessarily know what did happen or what didn't happen. So the Gemara says, "V'leima chazaka shliach ose shlichu." So, we'll say, why don't we say this in general in halacha? There's a chazaka that a shaliach executes his agency. General chazaka like that when you give an agent something to do, he gets the job done. So Dam Rabbi Yitzchak, Omer l'shluchot seva kadosh leisha stam. Listen to this: that if a man says to a shaliach, "Go and find me a wife," he has a lot of faith in this shaliach, right? Right? You know me, you know what I'm looking for, right? Go and find me a wife. So we'll say, so now what happens? This is incredible. Shaliach goes out, umeis, and he dies. Umeis shlucho. This guy is not allowed to marry anyone. They will say, now why is he not allowed to marry anyone? The chazaka is why. Chazaka shliach osa shlichuso. The chazaka is the shliach did in fact betroth someone for the principal. And I will say, why can't he marry anyone else? there's a concern that maybe the woman who he's going to marry is going to be the sister of the woman who was betrothed by the shaliach. Okay, so the point is, what do you see from here? What do you see from here? The chazaka that a shaliach does his job. So in this case over here, if the husband went ahead and gave the get to the shaliach, right, and the husband's admitting that, shliach says, I gave the get to the wife, shliach saying that, wife saying, I received the get from the shaliach. So we'll say, so in this case over here, I know it's hard for us to process, because no one's disagreeing in this case, right? We're like, what's going on over here? What's wrong? Right? Everyone is agreeing about what happened. There's just no document. So why do we say chazaka shliach osa shlichuso? And we should be done. And we should be done. To which the Gemara will say, Amen days, hani mili l'chumra. We'll say, when do we say shliach osa shlichuso? That's l'chumra. That's ultimately, again, when it comes to astringency. Aval l'kula, we'll say, for example, in the case of kiddushin, like we just saw before, aval l'kula lo. I will say, but when relying on that concept of chazaka shliach osa shlichus will result in a kula leniency, as it would in this case, namely that we would allow her to remarry based on the even though we don't see a get in front of us. In that case, we do not rely on chazaka shliach osa shlichus. So why do we just believe her, the wife? Beis Rav Hamnuna, Dam Rav Hamnuna, Ha'isha she'amar labayla gerashtani ne'emenes. Wow. A woman says to her husband, you have divorced me, right? She is believed. Why should we say, Ein ha'isha me'iza paneh b'fnei bayla? We'll say, you know, a woman, people lie, right? People lie all the time, but the assumption is that people won't tell a bold-faced lie directly in the presence of someone who knows that they're lying. That's the general rule. So a woman would never say to her husband, you divorced me, in his presence, when she did not divorce him. She did not divorce him. So I will say, if the wife is saying to the husband, you divorced me, right? You divorced me, so she should be believed. I will say, when will a woman not lie in the presence of her husband? When there's no one else corroborating the lie or corroborating her statement. However, but if there is someone else corroborating her version of events, then ultimately, again, she will be empowered, ultimately, again, to lie even in the presence of her husband. So in this case over here, where quote-unquote she would be empowered because the shaliach also agrees that I delivered the get, there's a concern over here that she may not be telling the truth. Therefore, I will say, interestingly enough, it would appear in this case over here that halacha l'maisa, that ultimately, again, we would not allow her to be divorced in this. This is fascinating. So even though you have the husband saying, I gave the get to the shaliach saying, I gave the get to the wife saying, I received the get from the shaliach, but the get got lost. Without a get in her hands, we would not allow her to remarry, unless, of course, she could produce two witnesses who saw her receive the get. If she had that, if she saw two witnesses who allowed her to receive the get, then ultimately, again, it would allow her to get remarried. But in the absence of that, she would not be able to. It's a fascinating case. No, even though all parties involved, right, all parties are involved, are admitting what happened. In other words, there's no machlokes about the circumstances, but without the actual get, halacha l'maisa, she cannot get remarried. Incredible. Mishnah, Nara Murasa, we'll say fascinating case over here. Nara Murasa, we'll say quickly, Nara Murasa. Who's Nara Murasa? 3 stages in a woman's development. Kitana, below the age of 12. Nara, between 12 and 6 months. And after 12 years old, and 12 and a half years old, she is a bogeres gidola, an adult woman. Fine. Nara murasa. So we'll say, so now you have a betrothed Nara. So we'll say, so remember again, a betrothed Nara is exactly that. A girl between the ages of 12 and 12 and a half, ultimately who has received kiddushin. Hiva avia mekablen eskita. Both she and her father, have the ability. So we'll say, so now let's say she had kiddushin, but now they don't want to go through with it. So ultimately, again, she or her father, or she and or her father, have the ability to receive the get on her behalf. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, ein shtei yadayim zochos ka'achos. 2 hands can't acquire as one. Ella. Avia mekabel eskita bilvad. So I will say, so it comes along, Rabbi Yehuda says, no. You can't have 2 people who have the ability to receive a get. It's either she or her father. So therefore, again, he holds only her father has the ability to receive the get on her behalf. Any woman who cannot guard her get, right, can't watch her get, cannot receive it, cannot get divorced. Okay, let's analyze. So we'll say, what are they arguing about? First machlokes in the Mishnah. Tanakama says that either the girl or her father have the ability to receive the get. Rabbi Yehuda is saying only the father has the ability to receive the get. What are they arguing about? Rabbanan Savri Yada Yisirasa Zakila. the Rabbanan say that a Nara has the unique privilege of having an additional hand. Her hand and her father's hand. Rabbi Yehuda Savar b'makom avia yad dila laftlum. Rabbi Yehuda holds no, halacha l'maisa. If her hands work, then her father's doesn't. If her father's hand works, which it does while she's a Nara, then her hand does not. Well, so stop over for today. Shkoyach.